I was born in a small village in Pakistan surrounded by dusty fields and narrow alleys that smelled of earth after rain. My childhood was not painted in bright colors but in shades of struggle. Poverty followed us like a shadow that never faded. My father worked long hours in the landlord's fields, yet most of the crop never reached our home. My mother prayed day and night, her hands always lifted toward the sky, asking for a miracle that would lift us from misery. Sometimes days passed with only water and bread to fill our stomachs, but dreams were never short in our hearts. I often watched the village youth return from the cities or the Gulf. They came back in shiny clothes, speaking proudly of Dubai, Jeddah, or Riyadh. They built large houses and brought gifts for everyone. The villagers praised their success, and envy filled my chest like fire. I would think, if they can do it, why can't I? I imagined returning home one day with gifts for my mother and a smile on her face free of worry. But the road to that dream was steep. I had no education, no money, and no connections to travel legally. My hope began to fade until one afternoon an old friend named Salim came back from the city. He had once worked in Dubai but had been deported. Still, his stories made my heart race. He said, "Kashif, if you truly want to go abroad, there's a way. It's risky, but it works. Some agents arrange everything. You'll be in Saudi before you know it." His words struck me like lightning. I asked, "But what if they catch me?" Salim laughed loudly as, "My friend, thousands go like this every month. Fortune favors the brave." His confidence drowned my doubts. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mother's tired face kept appearing in my thoughts. I imagined her finally living in comfort, her tears replaced by prayers of gratitude. I met the agent a week later. He was smooth-spoken and well-dressed, his smile full of deceit I failed to see. "Give me your passport, arrange some money, and I'll handle the rest," he promised. "When you open your eyes, you'll be in Saudi Arabia." I sold everything I could. My mother's jewelry, borrowed money from neighbors, and handed it all over. When the plane finally took off, I looked out of the window and whispered, "My life begins now." I didn't know that I was flying not toward freedom, but into the storm that would change everything forever. The moment the plane touched down in Jeddah, I felt as if my entire life was waiting to begin. The lights of the city glittered like scattered diamonds across the desert, and for a moment my heart filled with hope. I thought of my mother's face and whispered under my breath, "Soon everything will be fine." But fate had written a different chapter for me. As I stood in line at immigration, holding the passport that I believed was my key to a new world, my palms began to sweat. The officer took my passport and glanced through it. His eyes paused for a long moment on one page. He looked up at me, his face expressionless, and said something in Arabic that I didn't understand. Before I could speak, two other men appeared. One gestured for me to follow. My heartbeat quickened. "Sir, what happened?" "Is there a problem?" I asked in broken English. They didn't reply. I was led into a small room with white walls and a single metal chair. A different officer entered, holding my passport. He stared at me coldly and said in rough English, "This visa, fake." The words hit me like thunder. "No, please, it's a mistake. I didn't know. The agent promised." Before I could finish, he slammed the passport onto the table and called the guards. In moments, cold steel cuffs were locked around my wrists. My knees weakened. I tried to explain, but no one listened. My voice echoed helplessly in that empty room. They took me away through long corridors, past glass doors and watchful eyes, until we reached a van that smelled of sweat and despair. My mind was spinning. Every hope, every plan collapsed inside me like a fragile wall of sand. I had imagined stepping onto foreign soil as a free man. Instead, I arrived as a criminal. When the prison gates opened, fear crawled through my veins. The air was thick with humidity and hopelessness. The sound of metal doors clanging shut behind me made my heart sink. Inside the cell, men from different countries sat in silence, tired, broken, and defeated. I found a corner and sat down, covering my face with trembling hands. Tears escaped before I could stop them. I whispered, "God, what have I done?" I had traded my family's pain for shame. I had sold honesty for a dream made of lies. In that single night, I learned the truth that no one in my village had told me. The quickest road to paradise often leads straight into hell. The days inside that Saudi prison felt like years carved into stone. Every morning began with the harsh clang of metal doors and the shouting of guards who spoke a language I barely understood. Their voices echoed down the long, dim hallways as if to remind us that we were no longer human, just numbers behind bars. The air inside was heavy with sweat and despair. It smelled of fear, of hopelessness, of lives that had been buried while still breathing. I shared my cell with dozens of men. Some were from Bangladesh, some from India, Sudan, or Egypt. We were all strangers bound by the same mistake, trusting lies that promised a better life. The floor was hard, the blankets thin, and the food hardly enough to keep us alive. They gave us dry bread, sometimes half-rotten rice, and salty water that burned the throat. We ate in silence, each man lost in his own misery. There was only one small window, high above the wall, just large enough to let in a thin line of light. Every time a sunbeam touched the floor, I would stare at it for hours. That light became my only friend. It reminded me that beyond those walls, the sky was still blue and the world still moved. At night, the prison turned into a restless sea of cries and whispers. Some men prayed loudly, calling upon God to forgive them. Others cursed the agents who had trapped them. I often sat in a corner, hugging my knees, trying to drown out the noise. Sleep was a luxury none of us could afford. One evening, an old prisoner with a white beard noticed my tears. He sat beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said softly, "don't let this place destroy you. Prison either breaks a man or makes him humble. Which one will you be?" His words struck deep. I asked him, "But why did God let this happen?" He smiled sadly. "Sometimes God closes every door so that you finally look up." That night, for the first time, I prayed not for escape, but for strength. I told God, if this is my punishment, then let it cleanse me. Don't free me until I've learned what I need to learn. The next morning, something inside me felt lighter. I was still a prisoner, but my heart had begun to search for peace. In those walls of despair, faith was the only thing that couldn't be chained. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks felt like endless years. Yet somewhere in that suffocating darkness, a small flicker of faith began to glow. I started to observe the other prisoners more closely. Some had lost their minds, some had turned bitter, but a few carried a strange calmness in their eyes, as if they had already made peace with destiny. Among them was a man named Jamil, a Bengali prisoner who always greeted everyone with a quiet smile. One night, while the rest of us tried to sleep on the cold floor, Jamil sat beside me and said softly, "Brother, you look lost." His tone was gentle, almost fatherly. I nodded. I came here dreaming of money and freedom. But I destroyed everything instead. My mother's tears haunt me every night. Jamil sighed deeply. "You're not the first. I too came here chasing a dream. I wanted to earn enough to send my mother for pilgrimage, but now," he paused, eyes glistening with unspoken pain, "now I don't even know if she's alive." His voice broke, and for a moment both of us sat in silence, listening to the distant echoes of other prisoners whispering prayers. The next day, I saw Jamil helping a sick inmate stand up. Another time, he gave away his bread to a new prisoner who hadn't eaten for days. Watching him, I realized something profound. Faith wasn't just about praying. It was about holding on to humanity when everything around you turned cruel. One afternoon, a group of guards entered the cell and began yelling, hitting men without reason. The prisoners scattered like frightened birds. A guard pushed Jamil to the ground and struck him. Instead of fighting back, Jamil just whispered, "God sees." That sentence pierced my heart like a blade. I helped him up afterward, and he smiled weakly. "Patience, brother. Patience is our greatest weapon." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my mind. God sees. Maybe that was what I had forgotten all along. I had been so focused on escaping my poverty that I forgot to trust the one who had power over every escape. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. As the first light filtered through the tiny window, I spread a piece of cloth on the floor and prayed. My tears fell quietly. I didn't ask for freedom this time. I only said, "Oh God, make me worthy of it." In that moment, for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The monotony of prison life continued, but my heart had begun to find small pieces of peace in prayer and patience. Every sunrise felt like a reminder that God hadn't forgotten me. Yet, deep inside, I wondered if I would ever see my mother again, if freedom was still written in my fate. One morning, an unusual silence filled the prison. The guards, usually harsh and loud, moved quickly down the corridor, speaking in low tones. Something was different. The heavy iron door creaked open and the warden entered, followed by a tall Arab man dressed in spotless white robes. His face was calm but carried an air of authority. A prayer bead moved slowly through his fingers as his eyes scanned the room full of broken men. Whispers rippled through the cell. Who is he? A prince? A sheikh? The man walked slowly past us, pausing now and then as if searching for something or someone. When his gaze met mine, he stopped. He turned to the warden and murmured something in Arabic. The warden nodded, then pointed toward me. You, Kashif. Come, the warden ordered. My knees trembled as I stepped forward. Fear clutched my chest. I thought perhaps a new punishment awaited me. But when I stood before the man, he looked into my eyes and his voice came gently, though with strange authority. Your name is Kashif? Yes, I whispered, barely able to breathe. He smiled faintly. Today you are free. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Free? I repeated, my voice shaking. Why? The man replied calmly. Every Friday, I free one prisoner in the name of God. Today, that prisoner is you. Tears blurred my vision. My heart raced. I fell to my knees, unable to speak. The man placed a hand on my shoulder. But remember, he added, freedom comes with responsibility. You will live in my house and serve me. That is the price of your freedom. The words struck me strangely, but how could I refuse? I nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I agree. Minutes later, the guard unlocked my chains. As the cold metal fell from my wrists, I felt the weight of despair lift. For the first time in months, sunlight touched my face. As I stepped outside the prison gates, the wind hit me softly, carrying the scent of freedom. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Oh God, you really heard me." But little did I know, the freedom I had just received was the beginning of another kind of captivity. As the prison gates closed behind me, I felt reborn. The air outside carried a sweetness I had forgotten. The warmth of sunlight wrapped around me like mercy. The Arab man, whom everyone respectfully called Sheikh, led me to a large black car parked outside the walls. Its seats were soft, and the faint scent of perfume filled the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. The Sheikh quietly turned his prayer beads while I stared out of the window, trying to believe that I was really free. After an hour's drive through endless desert roads, we arrived at a palace unlike anything I had ever imagined. Golden gates glimmered under the sun, fountains danced in the courtyard, and white marble walls stretched high like a fortress. My eyes couldn't contain the sight. It was as if I had stepped into another world. The Sheikh looked at me and said calmly, "This will be your home now. You are free here, but remember, freedom has its limits." His words sounded kind, yet something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. Inside, the palace was even more breathtaking. Chandeliers hung from high ceilings, carpets so soft they silenced every footstep, and servants moving quietly like shadows. A few of them looked at me with sympathy, others with warning in their eyes. The Sheikh showed me to a clean room with a bed, food, and new clothes. Compared to the prison cell, it felt like paradise, yet my heart remained uneasy. Days passed. I worked in the palace gardens, served food, and cleaned the halls. The Sheikh often watched me in silence, as though studying me. His attitude was strange, sometimes kind and gentle, sometimes cold and unreadable. One evening, as I was returning from the courtyard, a man named Sami, one of the older servants, approached me quietly. His voice trembled as he said, "Kashif, be careful. This palace is not what it seems. We are all prisoners here. I frowned. Prisoners? But the sheikh freed us. Sami looked around fearfully and whispered, Yes, he frees us from one cage only to lock us in another. We serve him for life. No one leaves this palace without his permission. No one ever has. A chill ran down my spine. Then why don't you run away? I asked. Sami gave a sad smile. Try once, and you'll understand. That night, lying on the soft bed, I realized that the comfort around me was just another form of chains, beautiful, invisible chains. Following morning, the sheikh summoned me to the grand dining hall. The golden chandelier sparkled above his head as he sat calmly at the long table, surrounded by silence. Sit, he said, gesturing toward the chair beside him. I obeyed, still unsure what he truly wanted from me. He began eating slowly, slicing his food with elegant precision before saying, Kashif, I took you from a pit of darkness. I gave you life, food, and a place among men. Now it is time for you to return the favor. I felt my throat tighten. How can I serve you, Sheikh? He placed his fork down and leaned closer. His eyes were sharp, glimmering like blades. Tomorrow night, you will take a man's life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, hoping I had misunderstood. What? I whispered. You heard me, he said evenly. A man who betrayed me. You will find him where I send you and end his life. I have already forgiven your past. Now prove your loyalty. The room seemed to spin around me. My hands trembled and I could barely speak. But Sheikh, you read the Quran. You pray every day. How can you order murder? A cold smile touched his lips. Faith and power are different things, Kashif. A lion must protect his pride. I do what I must. His words struck like thunder. I wanted to scream that it was wrong, but fear locked my voice. He stood up, placed a silver dagger on the table, and said, Tomorrow, after sunset, you will use this. Obey me, and your life here will prosper. Refuse and ahiko, and you'll wish you were still behind those prison walls. That night, I couldn't sleep. The dagger's image burned in my mind. I thought of my mother, her trembling hands praying for me. Would she ever forgive her son if he became a murderer? Tears filled my eyes. I whispered into the darkness, God, you freed me once. Don't let me fall again. Just before dawn, Sami found me sitting alone in the courtyard. He looked at me with deep sadness and said, I know what he's asked you to do. Every one of us has heard that order. Some obeyed and disappeared. Some refused and vanished differently. Choose wisely, brother. The Sheikh's mercy has limits, but God's doesn't. As the sun rose, I made my choice. My heart trembled, but my soul stood firm. I would not kill for anyone. The sun slid down the palace walls, and the evening spread like oil across the courtyard. Inside the grand hall, the chandelier lights cast long shadows that seemed to slither along the marble. I could still feel the weight of the dagger's memory on the palm of my hand, as if the metal had branded my skin. All night, my mind had replayed the Sheikh's words, prove your loyalty. They rang like a verdict. When the Sheikh summoned me again, his face held that same unreadable calm. Guards flanked the doorway, their silhouettes rigid and unforgiving. I walked forward with footsteps that felt heavier than chains. My throat was dry, but my heart beat steady in its crooked rhythm. I had thought about running, about pleading, about bargaining, but each thought ended against the same wall. I could not take another human life for the sake of comfort. I stood before him and felt every gaze in the room press into my back. The Sheikh looked at me for a long moment and then asked almost casually, Have you considered the reward? Your place here will be secure. You will be honored. His voice was soft as incense, but there was an edge beneath it that cut. My answer came from somewhere deeper than fear. No, I said, I cannot do this. You showed me mercy, freedom from prison, but I will not repay you with blood. I have been a sinner. I have been desperate, but I will not become a murderer for anyone. A ripple of astonishment passed through the assembled servants. Some eyes widened with respect, others narrowed in fear. The Sheikh's face did not betray anger at first. Rather, it was the slow dawning of a disappointment so complete it seemed to echo. He stood, folded his hands, and regarded me as a judge might regard the one who has defied a sentence. "You refuse," he said simply. The words were not a question. The guard stepped forward, expecting my compliance. I felt their eyes on me like coals, waiting for me to flinch. Sammy, who had warned me earlier, kept his distance but did not look surprised. A few of the older servants watched with a fragile hope, as if someone's refusal might remind them of something they had long buried. Courage, perhaps? Or a forgotten conscience? The Sheikh's voice changed, softer and colder. "Very well," he said. "Then accept the consequences of your choice." For a second, I feared the worst. The stories Sami had hinted at, those who vanished, returned to my mind like shadows. My legs wanted to run, but my resolve had already rooted me like a tree in storm. They took me to a smaller chamber and left me there under heavy watch. The guards were polite, yet distant. Their silence tasted of finality. Alone, I sat on the edge of a simple bed and pressed my forehead into my palms. I did not pray for my life to be spared. Instead, I prayed for strength for whatever would come next, for patience, for the courage to face injustice without letting my soul fall. Outside, the palace carried on, music, servants, and the soft clink of glasses. Inside me, however, a quiet had settled, the calm of someone who had chosen the hard path and discovered, in that bleak instant, an unexpected peace. Hours passed in that dimly lit chamber where they had locked me. The silence was so thick that even the ticking of the clock felt like thunder. I kept expecting the door to burst open and armed guards to drag me away. Yet nothing happened. Just when my fear began to settle into despair, footsteps echoed outside. The door opened and two guards ordered, "The Sheikh wants to see you." As they led me through the corridors, I tried to steady my heart. I had accepted that this might be my final walk, but instead of dread, I felt calm, like a man who had already surrendered everything. The grand hall glowed under the golden lights when I entered. The Sheikh sat upon his high chair, a cup of coffee before him, his eyes unreadable. Around him stood his attendants, silent as statues. "Come forward, Kashif," he said quietly. His tone carried neither anger nor kindness. I stepped closer. The hall was so still that even the rustle of my clothes echoed. "You refused my command," he said. "You defied your master." I nodded slowly. "Yes, because my master is God, not man. You saved me from a prison of walls, Sheikh, but I will not enter a prison of sin." A flicker passed through his eyes, something between rage and surprise. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons. I thought that was the end, but then, suddenly, the Sheikh leaned back and laughed. Not a cruel laugh this time, something weary, almost broken. He stood up, walked toward me, and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You have done what few have done," he said softly. "Every year I release prisoners and offer them the same test. All of them fail. They kill for me, lie for me, or sell their souls for comfort. But you chose truth over fear." I stared at him, stunned. He continued, "Years ago, I was a tyrant. I ruled men through fear, thinking I was powerful, but one day, an innocent man refused to obey me, just as you did. I killed him and lost my peace forever. Since then, I have searched for men who would stand against my command, not bend before it. And today, I found one." He motioned to the guards, "Remove his chains. Return what belongs to him." A servant brought a passport, a bag of money, and my papers. The Sheikh looked into my eyes. "Go, Kashif. Live freely. And remember, true freedom belongs only to those who fear God, not men." Tears blurred my vision. I bowed my head and whispered, "You have freed more than my body, Sheikh. You have freed my soul." When the palace gates opened that final morning, sunlight poured across the marble like spilled gold. I stood there, speechless, holding the small bag the Sheikh had given me. In it were a few clothes, money, and a ticket home. But the real weight I carried was not in my hands. It was in my heart. The lessons of fear, faith, and freedom had etched themselves deep into my soul. The Sheikh stood a few steps behind me, his face calm, eyes lowered in reflection. Go, Kashif, he said quietly. Do not look back. The world outside is harsh, but your faith will protect you. Remember, the greatest prison is disobedience to your conscience. I turned, bowed slightly, and whispered, May God forgive us both. Then I stepped into the open road, feeling the desert wind against my skin. For the first time in years, there were no walls around me, no guards, no orders, only the vast sky stretching endlessly above. Days later, I boarded a flight to Pakistan. The sound of the engine reminded me of that first journey, the one that had begun with hope and ended in despair. But this flight was different. I wasn't chasing wealth anymore. I was returning with wisdom. When the plane landed, my eyes welled up before I even stepped outside. The smell of my homeland, the sight of distant hills, the language echoing through the airport, all of it felt sacred. Outside the terminal, I saw her, my mother, older, frailer, but still radiant in her patience. The moment she saw me, her trembling hands rose to her face and tears flowed freely. I dropped my bag and ran to her, falling at her feet. I'm home, Mother, I said, my voice shaking. She cupped my face, weeping. I knew God would bring you back. I prayed every night that night. As I sat beside her on the old woven mat, we ate simple bread and lentils, the same food I once ran away from, but it tasted sweeter than any meal I had ever known. Months passed. I started working honestly as a laborer in the nearby town. The pay was little, but my sleep was peaceful. I began helping others who dreamed of going abroad, warning them about the false promises of illegal agents. People listened, and some lives changed. Sometimes I still think about the sheikh, the man who tested me, the man who taught me that not all prisons have bars, and not all masters hold whips. True bondage, I learned, lives in greed and fear, and true freedom, it begins the moment a man bows his head, not to another man, but only to God.